Hi, my name's Carol Ricard, and welcome to this episode. Thank you so much for joining me. I want to share with you one of the most important kind of topics today, and that is what to do with anger. So, just a little bit, in case you're not familiar with me, my background is for 30 years, I worked in hospitals teaching people coping skills. And, my dream has always been to catch people before they landed in a hospital. Now, these 30 years of experience served me very well when I was diagnosed with cancer in 2019. And so I felt like I had a huge advantage going through my cancer journey and my cancer treatment. And today, at least I can tell you, is that I am kind of living with no evidence of disease in my body. And so I'm super grateful for that. But one of the things is that I wanted to take and share these tools with everybody. And that is really the mission that drives this, sharing with you today and quite honestly, every day. It's what I've written about in, a number of my books. In fact, my most recent book is that one right up there, I Am Not Cancer, which you can find, at other bookstores. But back to today, because the thing about today is there is this one emotion that, quite honestly, has gotten a really bad rap. And it's anger. I can't tell you how many people over the years, when I would start to do a group with my patients, would say, "Oh no, Carol, it's bad to be angry, or it's not good to get angry." And here's the thing, anger is like this natural human emotion. In fact, it is really one of our most powerful stress responses that we have. And if you think about it, really, what I kind of like to say, and if you've never seen this before, is I like to say that we are kind of like a bottle of root beer, all right? And that if you shake up a bottle of root beer, that pressure begins to build up inside and it doesn't go anywhere. Of course, if you've ever opened a bottle of root beer and had it all over the place, that could happen. But also, what I want you to realize is that not all bottles will explode. What ends up happening is that some bottles will actually tend to implode. And that is what makes talking about anger so important, because I like to say is that life shakes us up. And what ends up happening is that pressure starts to build inside of us until it gets to the point where it's either spilling out, all right, and kind of coming out in words or actions where you might be kind of spilling on somebody else, or it stays in and it actually makes you sick. And quite honestly, when you are dealing with any health issue, but particularly cancer, but it applies to whether it's diabetes, whether it's hypertension, you have gut issues, right? Doesn't matter. When all of that pressure is building up inside, it's not good for your health. All right. Not good for us. And what I wanted to point out is that sometimes people are a little bit more like this bottle of seltzer, because if I shake it up, right, you don't necessarily see the foam that's right there. But if I come back to this root beer, you do see the foam that is right there. And so sometimes we have to look a little harder. And when it comes to anger, one thing I've discovered is that not everybody is even aware of when it's present in their life. And you know why I know this? Because it started with me. If you had met me 30 years ago, all right, you probably would have said, "Oh, Carol is such this calm, kind of happy sort of person. She doesn't get very angry." And the truth is that I didn't get angry. But I'll never forget, I had this one time when I was actually in a treatment team and I was really, really like upset to the point where now what a treatment team is that we get together. So the doctor, the social worker, the nurses, everybody gets together and talks about this particular patient. And we had this one patient who had taken and basically painted all over her room. So I worked in an inpatient mental health unit, and they were going to kick this patient out. And I was so upset because the very reason this person did this was the reason that they were in the hospital to begin with, right? And what ended up happening was I ended up crying. The tears, just started coming out. Now, I didn't really think much of it then. I just knew that I was so upset. And about 2 weeks later, my nurse manager called me into her office, and she wanted to talk to me. And she thought that basically she said, "Carol, I'm concerned because you seem to be too emotionally involved with your patients." And she referred back to this incident where I was crying. And what I had to say to her is I was really upset because I couldn't believe that you wanted to discharge this patient when it was the very reason why she needed to be here. And that was the beginning of my discovery, right? I realized that, well, I didn't get angry, but I got upset. But what cemented it for me was just a couple weeks later, as part of my assessment as the recreation therapist, I would ask you, "So, what do you do when you get angry?" And I remember going to this woman, a 76-year-old woman, and saying, "So, Emma, what do you do when you get angry?" And she says, "Oh, I don't get angry." And I said, "Really?" And I said, "So you don't get angry at all?" And she said, "No." And I said, "Okay, so what happens if your son says that he's coming over for dinner and he never shows up? How would you say that you felt? What was that feeling like?" "Oh, I get upset." And what I realized was in that minute that anger doesn't just show up as anger. Basically, it shows up in a lot of different ways. And so that's what I kind of want to talk about. And that's going to be what we kind of work through today. All right. But what's really important to realize is that if you don't do anything with your anger, all right, it is going to come out one way or another. It is going to come out. And what I like to say is that there are basically three styles that people have. And what I want to do is I want to kind of share with you what those are, and we'll kind of go over each one of those. All right. So with that, I'm going to refer to my board. So I'm going to use red just because, I don't know, I think it's such an appropriate color for anger. So here's the first style I want you to think about. When your anger comes out, all right, I want you to begin to think about, are you the boiler? And so one of the things is that you could be the boiler. And what the boiler means is that it's kind of like I was a boiler. All right, sort of the pot on the stove. And if what happens is, if you've ever had this happen where you were cooking something on the stove and all of a sudden it sort of boiled over and then it ended up making this sort of mess, right, on your stove. And so it just sort of oozes out. That's the way I like to think about a boiler. When it comes out, it just sort of oozes out, and it doesn't make too big of a mess. And really, it doesn't cause too much harm to what's going on. All right. So that's style number one. Style number two is just the opposite, which would be the exploder. And what that means is when it comes out, it spills out. And there can be little explosions, meaning just a little bit of damage, all right? Or it could be a lot of damage. And when I talk about damage, I'm not talking about physical damage. I'm talking about your relationships, all right? And the words that you say. And that really are words, are really kind of like invisible punches that we sort of throw out at people. And we're not always aware that it really is hurting the other person, and that harm it is actually doing to our different relationships. And, so the exploder is somebody that just sort of, it spills out, it comes out, and really it can create a lot of harm and a lot of damage. And then there's one more way, one more style, all right, that I've learned over my 30 years of clinical experience that people sort of have. And that is this. That's what I call the imploder, meaning that it never comes out, but it just stays in and it hurts you. And so here's the thing. I am a little bit of a boiler at times and a little bit of an imploder at other times. And what's really important is that you can be all three of these. It isn't just that a person is one or the other, although that can happen where you probably have this kind of, I like to call it your primary style, right? But what really it is that we could be all three of these in different situations. And so, for example, the when I was sitting in the treatment team, right, that was a great example of it sort of spilling out, right? It didn't hurt a lot, but it did hurt my professional credibility at that time. And so it was just this little spillover, but nonetheless, it spilled over. But at other times, and for most of my life, you know what? If I don't manage it and it stays in, I become the imploder, meaning that the only person it hurts is myself. And I would do this over the years. It would be migraines that would show up in my life. Then it could be depression. Once I got the migraines under control, if I don't do anything, because I actually am a person living with a mental health condition for the last 30 years. I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder and it like 30 years ago. And then, probably about 20 years ago, an anxiety disorder. And so today, if I don't manage my anger, it actually stays in and my anxiety levels will actually go much higher. All right. So just to realize, if we don't do something constructively with our anger and we hold it in and then it ends up coming out, or in my case, the imploder staying in, we're going to be in trouble. And quite honestly, when you're dealing with cancer, when you're dealing with any other health issue, this is not a good situation. All right. So you might be thinking, well, what do we do then, Carol? How do we begin to take steps to sort of manage this anger? Well, here's the thing. What we got to do is get to know it very, very intimately. All right. And I had a great exercise that I'm going to share with you. In fact, I have a little homework assignment for you. All right. Or think of it this way, think of it as an action assignment, because we won't make change in our life until we sort of take action towards making those changes. And so at the end, I'm going to share with you what it is I want you to do. But for now, I want to come back to this idea of a vocabulary, because you see, we all have our own anger vocabulary. And that's where we have to start. We have to begin with getting familiar with, all right, how does it show up in your life? All right. And to do that, I'm going to go back to my board. All right. So, all right. So here's what we're going to do. Just checking my time. All right. So what I like to think of is more of an anger umbrella. All right. And all right. So there's my anger umbrella. And we're going to put anger right at the top. All right. Now, here's the thing. I want you to think about, what are other words that you yourself would use to describe kind of different levels of anger. So let's start with ones that I've kind of already mentioned. All right. And that was upset. I would never say that I got angry. So let's put angry. So we could put angry. All right. But I wouldn't use that word. Remember what the word was I told you that happened to me and actually to Emma, the older woman that I was talking to? We would get upset. And so again, upset is part of my vocabulary. May not be your vocabulary, but I know that it's part of my vocabulary. So there's upset. Now, here's the trick. And let me get my bottles out of the way here. Oh, all right. There are a lot of different ways that we can describe anger. And I've started to kind of keep track of them over the years that I would do this exercise with my patients. And I actually want to, start this process, because if we don't know and we can't recognize it, then how are we going to do anything to manage it? And that's really the goal here. The goal is not to not be angry, all right, or to be upset or to be mad. Listen, we are the only creatures on earth that will experience emotions, all right? So that it becomes our job to begin to manage those emotions instead of those emotions managing us. All right. So let me get you started, and I want to get going and give some ideas. So one that would always come up was one I said, which was mad. All right. The easiest way I've found is to think of different situations. So if you had to wait in a really long line at the grocery store, right? How would you describe what you were feeling? I know for me, that word is frustrated. All right. Maybe for you, it's annoyed. Here's one. How would you feel if you found out that one of your friends or your family members was talking behind your back? Again, we're not focusing on what you would do, right? Like kind of confront them or tell them off. what I want you to really think about is the feeling. What would you describe you were feeling inside? And so, one that's come up over the years in regards to this is actually hurt or betrayed. So, are you beginning to get the idea? All right. Now, there is a whole lot more that we can do. Um, so, think about you thought that you were going to get this job promotion. It really seemed like it was yours to have. And then you find out that you actually don't get it. All right. How would you feel? Well, maybe I know I would be disappointed. All right. Now, let's say you were like me and you're watching this show, you were diagnosed with cancer, or somebody in your family was diagnosed with cancer. Anger would definitely maybe be one of the words that you would use. For me, it wasn't the diagnosis of my cancer, but it was the date that my surgery was actually set. So it was that situation. What I found myself feeling was really more fear, is what was coming. And so, fear. So, you beginning to get the idea here? Well, there are still a whole lot more feelings. Have you and would you? Now, what's really important to recognize is that when it comes to your action assignment, okay, what I want you to do is I want you to only focus on the words that you would use. I don't want you to think of just other words that other people would use. What we got to do is establish our own vocabulary when it comes to this sort of big umbrella feeling around anger. And so I'm going to throw out a few more that you can kind of think about. All right. Have you ever felt annoyed? Or how about this? Especially that, remember, I talked about that job and I said I didn't get the promotion. I was disappointed. But have you ever felt discouraged? Now, here's one that comes up a lot. All right. Is just mad. Oh, look at that. I already put it up there. Sorry about that. Couldn't even remember that I had written that. Well, another one, and honestly, this is one of mine that I probably would have used at some point in time. I would get pissed off. So there's pissed off, or I've had many, many patients say they would get ticked off, right? So I want to just sort of cheat and look at a couple of these, but you begin to get the idea, right? So, have you ever been irate, or have you ever felt aggravated? Definitely part of my vocabulary is feeling aggravated. And actually, I have a cheat sheet that I'm looking at. All right. And this is what I'm going to give you guys. But just to kind of give you the idea of this, sometimes people are just feeling stressed out. Or I've had people tell me that if they were waiting in line at the grocery store, right, and there was a really long line, the feeling that they would have was impatient because they had somewhere they had to be, or somebody was holding them up. How about let down? Have you ever found yourself feeling let down and using those words? Another one, and this happens a lot in relationships, is jealous, right? Another one I have here is, what if you were just feeling tense? And so you could just feel it in your body, and maybe the feeling that you had was tense. Let me just go through this list because there are quite a few other ones that we can, kind of talk about here. Hateful, I have furious, guilty, feeling disrespected. I have rage. I have agitated. I have powerless. I actually myself would say I would notice that I was feeling depressed. Um, there is sad. There's embarrassed. There is overwhelmed. What about powerless? What about livid? Right? And what about just bothered or disgruntled? All right. Now, you might have some other words that you would use when you're describing how you're feeling in particular situations. And so, what I want to get you to do, all right, and this is your action assignment, because quite honestly, we can't start to manage it until we can first see it. So, what your assignment, your action assignment is that I actually have a handout. And if you go to iamnotcancer.live, or if you look on this Facebook page, you will see a post with the attachment on it. All right. Got to give me time to put it up there. But what it is that it's a handout. And what I want you to do is I want you to sit down and to think about what are the words that are part of your anger vocabulary. All right. But also, I'm going to give you this key. All right. So, what you can do is once you try to do the work on your own, you can then look at this and decide if any of the ones you read on this piece of paper are part of your vocabulary. All right. Because that's step one. We got to identify what our vocabulary is. All right. And what we're going to do in the next episode, and you want to make sure you come back. And here's the thing, if you come back and you haven't done this first step, well, what we're going to talk about in the next step isn't going to quite it'll make sense to you, but you can't begin to use it until you know what your vocabulary is. So, again, just to sort of recap, anger is the most powerful emotion we have, and it's the most powerful stress response there is. And we can't stop it. All right. It's going to happen. The question becomes, what do you do with it? So, importantly, there are three styles. There's the boiler, where it spills out a little bit. There's the exploder, where it sort of comes out and creates damage. And then there's lastly the imploder, and it stays in. And again, the idea is that we all have our own anger vocabulary. And so your action step is to figure out what yours is. All right. Now, be sure to like and to follow us here. All right. And if you're doing this and you have any questions, you can send them to Carol or help@carolricard.com, and I will actually answer you and be able to guide you. And you're going to find this action sheet at iamnotcancer.live, or by looking on this Facebook page for the post that identifies the handout. So, with that, I will see you on the next episode.